Kashdile. This is Sakina Bhatt and welcome to Tibet This Week, a weekly feature in English about this week's news on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Central Tibetan Administration. Let's look at the headlines first. His Holiness the Dalai Lama congratulates Nobel Prize winners Nadia, Murad and Dr. Denis Mukwege. CTA President opens Kumaon Literature Festival, Himalayan Echoes in Nainital. CTA President in his Prague visit speaks on China's One Belt, One Road. 15th Tibet Study Group reconstituted at French National Assembly. Beijing has taken a sharp U-turn toward control and oppression, says US Vice President Mike Pence. Human rights situation in Tibet highlighted ahead of China's third UPR. Tibetan spiritual leader and Nobel laureate His Holiness the Dalai Lama congratulated Ms. Nadia Murad from Iraq and Dr. Denis Mukwege from Congo for being awarded this year's Nobel Peace Prize for their dedicated efforts to end the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2018 to Denis Mukwege and Nadia Murad for their efforts to end the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war and armed conflict.
Murad is a Yazidi woman from the northern Iraqi town of Sinja who was held as a sex slave by the ISIS. In 2016, she was made a UN Goodwill Ambassador for the dignity of survivors of human trafficking. Dr. Mukwege, a gynecologist and surgeon, has long worked to treat thousands of women and girls affected by rape and sexual violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo. His Holiness expressed his admiration and also mentioned about looking forward to working with them in a common effort to work towards making this world a better place for everyone. CTA President Dr. Lobsang Singye inaugurated the third edition of Kumaon Literature and Arts Festival titled Himalayan Echoes in the Kumaon Resort town of Uttarakhand on Friday last week. Dr. Singye spoke about CTA's Thank You India initiative, which marks 60 years since His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the first Tibetan refugees came to India. Dr. Singye told the host of writers and artists at the fest that no country has done more for Tibet and the Tibetan people than India. President Dr. Singye visited Prague, the Czech Republic, to participate in a series of talks, including the Forum 2000 on Sunday this week. Dr. Singye spoke about China's One Belt, One Road and recalled how China had occupied Tibet in 1959 under One Road. He further alerted the gathering and said that the situation faced by Tibet is likely to happen to Europe, with China setting up One Belt, One Road policy.
Freedom House report in 2016 and 17 have listed Syria as the least free region. And after Syria, we all know about Syria. After Syria, it's Tibet. Tibet is the least free region in the whole world. And hence your support, your voice is very important.
President said the Central Tibetan Administration is committed to serving the interest of the Tibetan people by addressing their grievances, at the same time working to resolve the Tibet issue by leading the non-violent Tibetan movement. On Monday this week, Dr. Singye spoke on the topic titled The Global Challenge of China at the Forum 2000. Speaking on the censorship of information by the Chinese government at home and abroad, Dr. Singye said, "The Central Propaganda Department of the Chinese government, agencies and private companies employ hundreds of thousands or even millions of people to monitor, censor and manipulate online content." According to the Freedom House's Freedom on the Net Report 2017, China was the world's worst abuser of internet freedom for the third consecutive year.
The US House just passed a Tibet Reciprocal Access Act, which essentially means Chinese diplomats and journalists and scholars, they come to America and they have free access to America. But similarly, American citizens and diplomats and journalists and students and scholars are denied access to Tibet. If that kind of bill be considered, even in the European Parliament and European countries, that's one thing to consider.
When asked about the possibility of democracy in China, Dr. Singhal said Xi Jinping-led Chinese government is adamant on continuing socialism and Chinese characteristics. The 15th Tibet Study Group at French National Assembly was formally reconstituted with 17 parliamentarians from 4 different parties on Saturday last week. The study group is led by Madame Elisabeth Tutu-Picard from La Republicaine Marche as president. Although she is a new deputy, she has visited Tibetan communities and held meetings with President of CTA Dr. Lobsang Singye and the Tibetan Parliament in exile. Ms. Tutu-Picard has been at the forefront of newly elected French National Assembly. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence in his remarks alleged Beijing's malign influence and interference in American democracy, business, academic institutions, and media organizations on Thursday last week. In a loaded criticism of Beijing's homeland and foreign policy at Hudson Institute, Pence said,
America had hoped that economic liberalization would bring China into a greater partnership with us and with the world. Instead, China has chosen economic aggression, which has in turn emboldened its growing military. Nor, as we had hoped, has Beijing moved toward greater freedom for its own people. For a time, Beijing inched toward greater liberty and respect for human rights. But in recent years, China has taken a sharp U-turn toward control and oppression.
Further speaking on religious repression and self-immolation, Pence mentioned about the deteriorating conditions of Chinese Christians, Buddhists, and Muslims. The deteriorating human rights situations in Tibet and China's unfulfilled promises made in the second cycle of Universal Periodic Review were brought to the attention of the UN member states at the UPR pre-session on Wednesday this week. Representing the Tibet Advocacy Coalition, Padma Dolma highlighted the grim human rights situation in Tibet. Dolma said that China has intensified its strict policies in Tibet, including the implementation of new security measures to monitor and further control Tibetans. Emphasizing China's unabated repressive policies in Tibet, she also added that the Chinese policies in Tibet focus solely on control and they violate rather than protect the rights of the Tibetan people. In the previous UPR, China had accepted the recommendation to facilitate the visit of UN human rights officials, including the High Commissioner to Tibetan and Uyghur areas, but China has failed in its implementation, added Dolma. She urged the UN member states to take a strong stance and include Tibet-specific recommendations to China in the third cycle UPR that is scheduled to take place earlier next month. So much for this week. See you next time and have a great weekend.